Good morning, everyone. I'd like to call this meeting to order and acknowledge that we are in Treaty One territory, the home and traditional lands of the Ojibwe, Cree, and Dakota peoples, and in the national homeland of the Red River Métis. Our drinking water comes from Shoal Lake 40 First Nation in Treaty 3 territory. My name is Carrie Linklater. I am your chairperson this morning. And I'm joined on the panel via Zoom by Mr. Jerry Arnell and Ms. Michelle Duncan. From the assessment department is Mr. Jason Brown, and our administrative personnel is Ms. Fran Pocoto and Ms. Twinkle Sharma. To the Zoom participants of the hearing, please note you were placed in the waiting room until your property is called upon. When it is your turn, you will be admitted into the meeting. Kindly follow along on the City of Winnipeg's Board of Revision YouTube channel for the hearing process. Once the host admits you into the hearing, please close or mute your YouTube player. You will be then permitted to speak with respect to your property. Once your hearing has concluded, you may leave the meeting. We will be hearing applications for revision of the assessment roll in accordance with the Municipal Assessment Act. The matters for which revision is requested have been described in each application, and we will limit discussion to those matters. Statements that are made at this hearing are sworn testimony, and anyone speaking to the matters must be sworn in. Be advised that comparisons of assessments of properties are not considered evidence of market value by the board. The Board of Revision is appointed annually by City Council and is independent of it and the City Administration. It makes its decisions on the basis of the evidence provided at this hearing and issues a written order that will be mailed to all parties as soon as possible. Please note that the board's decisions with respect to an application may be appealed to the Manitoba Municipal Board. The matter pertains to assessed value or classification, or to the Court of King's Bench if the matter pertains to the application of exemptions from taxation. Should you wish to appeal, information on how to do so will be included with the board's order. With respect to the hearing process, I will confirm the points of appeal with your property to be addressed with each applicant following the swearing in. We'll then have the assessor's testimony, followed by questions that the applicant may have, and then the applicant's testimony followed by questions. Each side will have an opportunity to summarize if they wish. Once all of the evidence about an application has been brought forward, the applicant may leave. The process will repeat for each item on the docket today. The session will close after all the applications have been heard, and the board will deliberate in private and make its decisions. You will receive the board's decision by registered mail as soon as possible. And as information, all public hearings are live streamed, recorded, and will be part of the public record. This morning, we will be hearing items 3 and 4 on our docket. Ms. Pocoto, would you please affirm the assessor and the applicant's testimony?
Certainly. Mr. Assessor, please state your full name.
Jason Brown.
Do you affirm that the evidence you're about to give at this hearing is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
Thank you. Mr. Applicant, please state your full name.
Sure, boss.
Thank you. Do you affirm that the evidence you're about to give at this hearing is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Abbas and Mr. Brown.
Morning.
We are going to proceed to item number 3, which is our first item on the docket, 1260 Clarence Avenue. And we are discussing the assessed value this morning on this property. So, Mr. Brown, whenever you are ready.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So this is roll number 0307045050, file number 24-3176. Civic address is 1260 Clarence Avenue. This is the Bueller Trading Incorporated owned building. We're defending a 2025 assessed value of $28,804,000 today. This is a light manufacturing industrial building built in sections between 1950 and 2011 with an effective year of 1963. We have wall heights ranging from 18 to 20. The land area is at 1,905,368, and we have a plan area of 786,556 square feet. I'm just going to move right to, I believe this is being asked for confirmation. Is that accurate?
Yes, it is.
Okay, so I'll just quickly go through my income workup on page 4. So we have the leasable area at 789,716 square feet. We've used 4.5% vacancy, 3% expenses, and a shortfall at $4 per square foot. We've capitalized the net operating income of $2,333,117 at 8.1%, which yields the value of $28,804,000 rounded. And we're asking that be confirmed as well. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Abbas?
No, I don't have any questions at this point, if that's what you're asking.
All right. Mr. Rydell?
No questions.
Thank you. And Ms. Duncan?
No questions, thank you.
I also have no questions. Mr. Abbas, if you would like to proceed.
Thank you. Madam Chair, we will be requesting for a confirmation at this point for this property, please.
All right, thank you. Mr. Brown, any questions regarding confirmation?
I have no questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Duncan?
No questions, thank you.
Mr. Rydell?
No questions, thanks.
We also have no questions. All right. Thank you very much for coming in this morning, Mr. Abbas. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
We will proceed to item 4, and Ms. Lakota, if you could swear in our applicant, Mr. Story.
Mr. Applicant, please state your full name.
My name is Jared Story.
Do you affirm that the evidence you're about to give at this hearing is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Story.
Good morning.
Okay. Mr. Brown, if you would like to proceed with 90 Lexington Park, and we are just looking at value of this property.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is file number 24-1650. Roll number is 04-007-265-215. Oh, sorry, 265-215. Civic address is at 90 Lexington Park, and this is the Palliser Furniture Company. We're defending a 2025 assessed value of $23,871,000 today. Once again, this is a light manufacturing industrial building. It's composed of 2 sections built in 1998 and 2000. Wall height is 30 feet. We have a land area of 1,632,424 and a leasable area of 245,864. The land to plan ratio is 7.84. Turning to page 3, I have some rental comparables. These are all larger buildings, similar to the subject. We can see that they range from 101,193 square feet up to 161,800 square feet. The wall heights range from 14 to 38 feet. And the effective year built ranges from 1909 to 2021. There's quite a wide range in rents displayed here, with the lowest being $2.69. I'll note that that's the oldest building with the lowest wall heights. And that goes up to $16.54. And I'll note that that is the newest building with the second highest wall heights. I have some land sale comparables on page 4 and 5. However, that's not in dispute today. So we can move to page 6, which is my income workup for the industrial building. So we have a total leasable area of 245,864 square feet. We're using an average rent of $5.44 per square foot. And this yields a potential rent of $1,338,328. We've reduced that by 1.5% vacancy, 3% expenses, and a shortfall of $4 per square foot. This yields a net operating income of $1,263,953. We've applied a 6.05% cap rate to that NOI, which generates the building value of $20,892,000 rounded. And then there's an additional land value component to this assessment at $2,979,000. And when we combine those, we generate the total estimated value of $23,871,000 rounded. Turning to page 9 is our capitalization rates. The city is using a range from the 20th percentile to the 80th percentile of 5.35 to 7.3, with the subject coming in at 6.05, so that falls between in that range. And that cap rate is supported by the outside sources at Colliers, CRBE or CBRE, and Cushman and Wakefield. Turning to page 11, there's a map view showing the location of the subject property. So this is in West Kildonan, between Gateway and Chief Peguis. Turning to page 12, we have some exterior photographs of the subject. This was inspected in October of 2023. So exterior shots on page 12 and 13. There's an interior shot on page 14 of an old retail space that's being repurposed, continuing on with more exterior shots. Page 15 shows the south building. Page 16 and 17 show interior of the office component. Moving on to 18 and 19, also showing the office space from the subject property. Page 21 shows the warehousing space, as well as 22 and 23. 24 looks like they have a photo studio in their first floor warehousing space, and on 25 shows the manufacturing plant, as well as 26. There's some site plans, 27, 28, 29, 30, and 31, showing the subject property and the layout of the site. This was rezoned. Part of this was rezoned in 2014, 2015. It does have some multifamily zoning aspects now attributed to the excess land. Page 34 shows some of the permitted uses of the land and the proposed development analysis on page 35. Page 36 shows the income and expense statement provided by the owner. This is owner occupied. There is a rent, but it would be a book rent, an internal rent that we did not rely on for the assessment. And based on that information, we're asking that the assessment be confirmed at $23,871,000. Thank you. I'm open for questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Mr. Story, any questions?
I have some questions. Yes, thank you. Okay, Mr. Brown, just very clearly, you'd mentioned, I think you said West Kildonan, but this is indeed in North Kildonan, correct?
Yeah, I believe it's pretty close to the line. I looked on the map and West Kildonan was just below the subject property. I'm not sure where the boundary was, but yeah, it could probably be considered almost on the verge of.
It's McLeod Industrial, right? So it's North Kildonan, which is pretty close to in that North Kildonan, Transcona, Elmwood sort of area, just behind Gateway, right?
Yeah,
right north of North Kildonan Mennonite Brethren Church.
Not sure where the boundary is, but looking on the
Okay.
map, I'll note that West Kildonan is displayed. East Kildonan is displayed right below
East
it.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Fair enough. Okay. And this is an irregular parcel, correct?
It is irregular, yes.
Yep. Okay. And we're not disputing the excess land calculation. That's fine. But when we look at the actual siting of the building on its parcel, that land to plan would be significantly lower than 7.8 to 1. Can we agree on that?
It has been carved up. This has been a subject of a replot. They have sold off pieces.
Right.
But yeah, it's highly irregular now.
Okay, and it's some. Can you agree with me? It just by virtue of its size, it's somewhat irregular in our industrial universe in Winnipeg. It's much larger for a single tenant property than what we're typically would expect to see. It would be in the top percentile of large single tenant industrial. Would you agree with me on that?
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Okay, and it's also, and I appreciate that you've inspected it. Our folks have too a number of times. I know we've talked about this many times. But can we agree that the way that the property is demised is specific to the business process of Palliser Furniture?
I'll just note that personally, I have not inspected it, but the department has.
Right.
Looking at the pictures, I mean, this was purpose built by Palliser for Palliser, so I would
Right.
assume that it was built
And-
with their specifications in mind.
Yeah, exactly. And it would have a higher degree of office area and office finish than a typical manufacturing plant. Is that a fair comment?
Yeah, judging by the plan that I reviewed, that there is a higher degree of office component to this,
Right.
yes.
And did you notice when you were reviewing this file that the actual road, Lexington Park, is a private road?
I did not know that, but I'll take
Right.
your word for it. Yeah.
Okay, so when we have a private road, are you aware then that the responsibility for maintenance and all of those other issues that come around ownership of maintaining a private road, those costs are borne by the owner? Be aware of that.
Sure, that would make sense.
Okay, and then if that's the case, and that's not typical, can we agree with that? In most industrial buildings in the city, the owner doesn't own the building and the private access, correct?
I mean, it's no different than having a large parking lot that you would have to maintain too.
Well, they also have a parking lot, so in this case, we have both, right?
Yeah, but there's industrial buildings with larger parking components than this.
Okay. But if we do have this issue of the private road, is the model, and this is all indeed model derived, correct?
Correct.
This assessment? Yeah. So is the model granular enough, I suppose, to recognize this atypical or unique feature and then make some adjustment based on how the market might view that extra liability and extra maintenance cost?
Most likely not.
Okay. Okay. Moving on very quickly. I'm looking at your rents. There are a few that I don't disagree with, and there's a couple that we've actually both used. But can we agree that of these 10, 5 of them would be considered reasonably short, so less than 5 years, let's say?
There's a few that are short. There's a few that are extremely long too, at 15 and 20 years.
Right. Okay. Yeah. And typically those longer leases should be lower, and the shorter leases generally would be higher as a general comment. Is that fair?
It's debatable. In my mind, sometimes when you sign a longer lease, you're buying future years with inflation. So sometimes they're higher too.
Okay. Okay. All right. And now this range, though, I couldn't help but notice that this range is running from $269 a foot to $1,654. So that's a pretty broad range. Can we agree on that?
Yeah, it's a huge range. I was focusing on size. There's not a lot of buildings this size in Winnipeg. I just wanted to show that there is a large range. But obviously the two lower ones are a bit older, lower ceiling heights, less desirable areas in my mind.
And they're all smaller, fair bit smaller, correct?
They are smaller, yes.
Yeah. Okay. Just in terms of leased area. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, okay, I'm looking at the two on Haggart. I've actually inspected both of those properties. Have you been inside those two properties on Haggart?
Driven by them and seen photographs.
Okay, but the interiors, can we agree that those would typically be considered best in class
They're
industrial?
highly superior, yes.
Yeah, okay, fine. So we can leave that alone. And then just finally, the last one, that 1 year lease on Dunlop, that's industrial rubber. That's an owner occupied property, correct?
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Okay. Oh, and of course, just lastly, 1001 Regent, that's sort of atypical. That's obviously that's not going to be a 1 year lease. That's where Amazon moved in, and presumably there's some amortization of buildup of that site. Is that fair comment from your understanding? 1001 Regent Avenue West?
I'm not super familiar with that, but it is Amazon. That's correct.
Okay. Okay. Moving on to page 6. So I notice here that we have 2 different premises. One premise has been allotted $5.30 per foot, and then the smaller premise is $8.07 per foot. But we can agree that this is single tenant, correct?
This is single tenant, and that's why I stated that the average was $5.44 per square foot.
Right. Okay, but in terms of market behavior, let's say, it would be, can you agree with me that it would be unlikely to apportion different rental rates to different premises, and it would generally be more typical that you would apply a base rent to the entirety of the leasable area, correct?
That's how it would be done in a private world, yes, but in terms of us, when we have different finishes, we'll assign different rents to those.
I understand. So, but then if that were the case, and if economies of scale, and I think you are, or the model is at least recognizing economies of scale based on the fact that that very large premise is much lower and the smaller premise is much higher, then if the entire leasable area of 245, 864 were applied one rental rate, then presumably it would, by the model, just by what's been presented here, it would likely be less than $5.30 per foot. Is that fair?
That's possible, but I am comfortable with the average at $5.44, and we are attributing that higher rent to a higher finished area.
Okay. In terms of this vacancy, can we agree? So this is McLeod Industrial, as we mentioned. This area is predominantly owner occupied. Most of the industrial buildings in this general area in North Kildonan would be considered. This is furniture park, so these are generally right. Okay, and is that leading to the model to output a lower vacancy rate?
That's possible. It is one of the problems with industrial throughout the whole city is there is a lot of owner occupied buildings.
Yeah, no,
more so than office or retail or anything like that.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Is there anything in this report supporting that that lower vacancy that's been output by the model?
No.
Okay. Cap rate, that's model derived as well?
Correct.
And you mentioned that it...
Excuse me, Mr. Story, can I ask you to adjust your microphone?
A microphone? Oh, yes, absolutely. Is that better?
When you're speaking, you're sort of dropping off towards the end, so I'm not really catching everything here. I don't know about the panel members, but... Is this better at all? Or if I move better. That's better? Okay. I'll try to sit still and not move this. Okay, yeah. Okay, perfect. Thank you. Okay, and sorry, Mr. Brown, you'd mentioned that the cap rate is, I think we just established that it is model derived, and that's fine. But you said that it was supported by the brokers. But can we agree that as a general principle, we're not going to have sales of these types of, call it atypical or out of the norm properties included in those studies? Is that a fair comment?
I'm unaware.
Okay. Okay, and okay, I think that many of our photos here will be similar. They're probably taken on the same inspection. So I think I'm good, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. Brown. Those are my questions.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Duncan, did you have any questions for the assessor?
Yeah, just under your rent comparables, what would you say your top 3 would be then that you think's most relevant?
It's difficult because a lot of them are older, and obviously none of them are as big as the subject, but Plymouth, Hutchings, and probably McLeod or Fife. But like I said, those are all older than the subject property and all have lower ceiling heights. So it's almost difficult to just pick one, but those would probably be the best ones.
Thank you. No other questions.
Thank you. And Mr. Arnell?
Just one in regards to the vacancy. So is it a sort of a standard for owner occupied to be at just 1.5?
No, these
No.
are location driven. Our vacancies are all location driven, and we do a canvas. We look at all the income and expense statements we receive, and then those are modeled.
Okay, thank you. That's all I have.
Thank you.
Thank you. So Mr. Brown, I'm gonna follow up on Mr. Arnell's question about vacancy. I don't think I've ever seen what is it, 1.5?
Mhm.
Yeah, it's the lowest vacancy we have for this cycle is in this area. Industrial's been in high demand ever since the pandemic. We've seen rental rates go up. We've seen vacancy go down. We've seen sale prices go up. And there is a shortage of industrial land in Winnipeg. We're seeing a lot of building outside of the outside of the city limits now. But the stock we do have is being scooped up pretty quickly.
So again, you had said this is model driven, so the model has just chosen this vacancy, correct?
Based on location, yes.
Okay, so the McLeod industrial area, that is a desirable area for light manufacturing?
It wouldn't be undesirable. Obviously, the south, off Kenniston and stuff would probably be the most desirable. But this is better than Inkster Industrial Park or St. Boniface Industrial Park for sure.
Right. Would you not agree this is a unique property, given it's on an irregular piece of land and the size of the building?
Yeah, I mean, it was custom built for the occupier, the owner occupier. So when usually that's the case, they're built for their own specifications.
Okay. So I guess I'm wondering how that very low vacancy comes into play. Because if this building were to be sold and it is custom built and so very large compared to most buildings, with the vacancy so low, would that, like, I don't see the marriage there between the vacancy being so low and the size of the building and its location.
Yeah, I mean, we analyze the income and expense data that we get from all the owners in the city, and this is what we're finding is happening in the market right now.
And you yourself did not inspect the property, correct?
That's correct, but it has been inspected multiple times, I believe 2019 and 2023.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Brown.
Thank you.
Mr. Spurry, you would like to proceed?
Yes. Thank you, Madam Chair. Okay, so once again, we are on 90 Lexington Park. I stress again that this is a private road, so that should be considered. That is not typical. It may be something like having a large parking lot, but it is indeed a higher degree of liability and a higher degree of maintenance. So I want to ensure that we keep that fact top of mind. Mr. Brown is quite right. It is a custom-built facility built to suit the needs of Palliser Furniture. It is zoned M1. I don't know that I would agree that this would be considered a superior location to any of the more suburban adjacent industrial parks. There is something of an agglomerative industry here that goes on with the benefit of having all these different furniture manufacturers in one area. But the issue, or one of the issues that we have, and Ms. Sinclair, you mentioned that it's hard to make the connection to the marriage between the vacancy and the size, because frankly, when you see a property this large, I'm aware of studies that talk about efficiencies and how even at a very base level, 1.5% doesn't seem supportive. And then of course, if these folks moved out, you wouldn't use a vacancy of 100%. So we're trying to use something that's more stable. So ultimately, this comes down to a slight discrepancy on the rents. As I mentioned, and I think Mr. Brown agreed, that if we were to view this from the eyes of the market, we would not apply separate rental rates to separate premises. We would rather apply one rental rate to the entirety of the 864,000 square feet. That is a very, very, very large single tenant industrial building in our market. I can't stress that enough. The city has used a blended rent of $5.44. We're using $5.15. I've provided 5 rental comps for you. And I've added for these very, very large properties, Madam Chair, I added a separate column at the very end and showing the size differential effectively. So you can see here that we agreed on 10 Hutchings, for example. I think we both included that in our studies, but it's only 60% of the size of our subject, and it's at $610 per foot. It's an older building. It's in Inkster, which I don't believe to be inferior. And it has a separate use, but based on what we've presented here, Madam Chair, we have an average of 446 and a median of 517 for properties that are in some cases zoned M2. For example, I'm looking at 1370 Sony. That's a very, very high quality building at 633, and it is larger. So I think we're right above the target at 515 per foot across the entirety of the square footage. So based on what we've submitted here, I believe that rent is supported. I do agree with the general sentiment that it's very, very hard to find leased premises over 250,000 square feet in Winnipeg. Typically, those are owner-occupied properties like the one we're dealing with today. I had mentioned vacancy. Now we've included the Johnson report in our study. The Johnson report would be considered the industry standard for tracking industrial vacancy. And you can see if you look at, for example, on sorry to flip around here, but this would be on my page. Nope, it isn't numbered. That's too bad. Okay, it's the vacancy and collection loss table, and it talks about December single vacancy rate by district. And it shows that East Kildonan and Elmwood, which would be the most germane to our discussion today, are showing 0% vacancy. However, at different points, that vacancy in Elmwood, for example, has been as high as 24%. East Kildonan is 3% at its highest. So what we've done is we've tried to use our best judgment here. We've looked to the overall vacancy. So we see, for example, December single tenant vacancy overall is at 4.8%. December investment vacancy by district is at 4.5% in total. So ultimately, we believe that 1.5% is too low, so we've applied 4%. And that does consider the size, and that's lower than the overall city average. But you'll find, Madam Chair, that we'll be using this cycle vacancies for industrial anywhere in the range of about 3% to 4.5%, unless there are any specific issues on a site-specific basis. But as a baseline, I think 4% makes sense, and it's certainly more supportable from my perspective than 1.5%. That's aggressively low. We've provided you with a standalone capitalization rate study, and that sort of gives you all of our assumptions as well as calculations on 5 sales that we looked up. I don't know that these have any direct, if they're directly relative to our subject based on our subject size and location and the fact that it is quite unique. But I will point out that we do consider single tenant buildings of more than 100,000 square feet as a greater risk. Clearly, there are less end users for spaces of that size in our market, and there is a greater vacancy risk. And I think, Ms. Linklater, I think you pointed that out as well, that if the property did go vacant, you'd have a huge space that would be sitting vacant. So there are factors to consider there. We're also considering the fact that we have that private road to maintain on top of our all of the other area that we have to consider. So with all that being said, and with some consideration to the fact that we didn't ultimately disagree with a 6.8 cap last cycle, and we are seeing compression of about 25 basis points for the better quality industrial. That is why we've used this figure of 6.55. You'll typically see us use rounded numbers like 6.25, 6.5, 6.75, or something like that. But I want to be very, very consistent, and I want to ensure that my report spoke to our conclusions of our cap rate study. So that is the rationale for using 6.55%. It is simply, we believe it's supported by the market. We believe that it captures the unique features, and it does recognize the amelioration in the industrial market cycle over cycle. Mr. Brown is quite right. Industrial did reasonably well at the front end coming out of the pandemic. So we are capturing that in my mind with a 25 basis point adjustment cycle over cycle. And we have included that is a rental adjustment over and above our previous position. So with that being said, and again, we don't dispute the adjustment to the excess land. So that's not in question for the purpose of our exercise today. Based on my presentation, our NOI is 1,139,747. Once again, that's 1,139,747. Capitalized with a rate of 6.55 leads us to an income value of 17,400,721. Adding in the agreed upon adjustment for the land of 2,979,000 gives us an indicated market value of 20,379,721. Oh, my rounding is off, but it should be 20,340,000. It says 379, but it should be rounded to 380,000. So we do respectfully submit that based on our site-specific review of the property, that a value of 20,380,000 is appropriate. And with that, I'm happy to take your questions, and I thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Brown, questions to the applicant?
Yes, please. Thank you, Madam Chair. So just going back to your vacancy on page 12
Yes.
through to page 16. So just to be clear, East Kildonan is showing 0% in 2022. That's correct?
Yeah. So and once again, as I think we both agreed, the industrial universe in East Kildonan is largely owner occupied. So the fear, Mr. Brown, would be that if one of these buildings were to go vacant, we wouldn't typically expect an extraordinarily high modeled vacancy on that basis. So it is 0%, but I'm saying that with an asterisk because we have a very, very high propensity of owner occupied buildings in that section. So we want to be careful not to cause distortion. So that's why we've applied 4%. So yeah, from my perspective, the vacancy for this building ought to range somewhere between 3.5% to 4.5%. So we've used 4.
Okay, thank you. And turning to your cap rate study.
Yep.
You've provided some sales and some workups in these, that's correct?
Yes, we did.
And you're using 2% vacancy for these cap rate workups, is that correct? For all but one, I believe.
That maybe I don't have it in front of me. Give me one moment. But if you have that there, yes. So that's, I mean, it's a little bit lower, but sorry, let me hold that up. Jeez. Well, I'll take your word for it. I don't have it in front of me, but yes,
Okay,
that's fine. Yeah.
All but one, you've got one at 4.5, but the rest are at 2%. So when you're developing a cap rate for this subject property, would it not make sense to compare apples to apples and use the same? Because we all know when you have a lower NOI, it would produce a different cap rate, right? Or a higher NOI.
Yeah, but I think that I don't know that it would be to be fair, for those sales, we're working backwards because we have the end point, we have the sale. So I don't know that if we adjusted the vacancy by 1 point, for example, that it would have a huge difference in the output. And once again, the cap rates that we've developed in our study, I don't know that they would have great application to this property because it is so unique. So we have considered, again, our position of both sides in the past. We've considered compression as tracked by the brokers cycle over cycle. And we tried to capture some of the very specific issues related to this site. Again, we have this private road, we have this enormous site, we have M1 zoning, and then we don't actually have a very high land to building if you look at the site. And so there are all these very unique aspects of this property. And frankly, I think that 6% or 6.05% or whatever that's been applied by the city is too low. So we've tried to use best judgment, but that's because we've actually reviewed it with people and not using a model. Though I appreciate that the city has to use a model to develop all these assessments. So that is our thinking behind how we've applied that cap rate.
Okay. Moving on to the road that is shared with 2 other properties. That's correct. MPIC and there's a church, I believe, too.
Well, it's owned. That road is owned by Palliser Furniture. That is,
But-
and if you go through that master development plan, so you included some of that language from 2013 from that development application, and I went through it, and actually there have been sort of plans for call it a village or whatever with a mixed use of commercial, industrial, and residential going back to, I believe it was at least the 90s and maybe even the late 80s. So that private road is contemplated there as well. This is an old CN yard, so there was also a right of way that was acting on this property, and then train tracks that were removed as well. So there's a long history to the development of this property, but that private road has been a consideration throughout the whole time, from what I can read in the notes from City Council.
Okay, but the MPIC building and the church do use that road. That's correct.
Well, I don't know if the church does. The church is right off of Gateway. They may. I'm not sure, but I know that it is owned, and the maintenance is it is contingent on Palliser Furniture to maintain that private roadway.
Okay. This does have a higher degree of office space. Generally, office space would command a higher rent than industrial on a
It would,
whole.
and it would also have a much higher cap rate. So
Okay.
Yes. Fair.
And then just one last question, just going back to your rental comparables on page 11.
Yep.
These are all older than the subject property, you would agree?
Yes. Yeah, it's
Okay.
again, our primary focus to have less distortion is to if we have to sacrifice age a little bit to go for size, that's what we have to do. I think we've both done the same.
Of course,
same thing. Yep.
But you will note that the 2 newer buildings in your comparables do have the highest rents.
Yeah, and that's fine. That's what we would typically
Okay.
expect to
So
see. But we also don't have the same size, so we have to consider the actual size of the property. There are a number of factors to consider. So, but I don't disagree with you. Typically, newer buildings would have higher rents than older buildings as a general concept.
Okay, those are my questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Mr. Arnell, any questions for Mr. Story?
Just clarification on the private road. Like you're saying MPI and the church, do they contribute towards the maintenance of the road, or do they have a signed agreement or an easement on that road?
Yeah, not that I'm aware of. My understanding that Mr. Brown has mentioned that those other folks use that road. I'm not aware of that. I don't know. I know that the ownership, if there's a bylaw that talks about private access, and it does indeed say pretty explicitly that the owner or the beneficiary, the beneficiary property is on the hook for all maintenance and any clearing and everything that you expect to be done on a city road is the responsibility of that owner for that private road, effectively. So I don't know if there's an agreement to share costs or anything like that, but ultimately we're just recognizing that from a market perspective, that unique liability and unique maintenance requirement should be captured somewhere, and we've elected to continue to capture that in the cap rate. But I'm not sure of any operating or any agreements regarding shared maintenance costs or any such thing.
Okay, that's all I had. Thank you.
Thank you. And Ms. Duncan?
Yeah, I apologize if I kind of missed this in the process, but I'm not entirely clear where the 4% vacancy came up with. I know you talked about it coming from all locations around the city.
Yeah.
At
Yes,
an average, all those.
Yeah, so what we did was we looked, so just to back up for 1 second, in this area, broadly considered furniture park. Many of these properties are owner occupied. There are large owner occupied properties. So that is causing, and I think Mr. Brown agrees, that causes something of a distortion in terms of the actual vacancy. So if you have this huge amount of inventory, so for example, we have almost 250,000 square feet in the subject alone, and it's fully occupied by the owner. So the vacancy reports that we're seeing for that location are much, much lower than the citywide average. So if the citywide average is something like 4.5 or 4.8, and if we've generally applied 3.5 to 4.5, somewhere in that range, then I think we're being very fair at 4%. And then we also consider that when we have these very, very large buildings, there is a good case for what I'll call inefficiencies, where not all of the space might be usable or used. So we would use something slightly higher than say 3, but I think 4% is supportable. I think somewhere between 3.5 and 4.5% is fair, based on the citywide average and based on the sheer size of the property. So that's our rationale.
Where was the citywide average captured? Where was that information? In their presentation or in yours?
Nope, that's in mine. That's we had pointed out the city has not included vacancy information. So I have a whole section on vacancy here, and it includes. Sorry, I'm on using paper, so I didn't number my forms. Hold on, I'll tell you.
It starts on page 12 and it goes to page 17.
I was going to say, yeah, sorry, on page 12. So if you see where it starts with vacancy, we have the inventory and vacancy breakdown for December of 22, and then further summarized in the charts. And it does show that East Kildonan and Elmwood would be the best proxies for this area, but Elmwood is showing vacancy from, call it a 8-year average here, between 10.7 and 22 or 24.4. But on 22, it's showing 0% vacancy, as is East Kildonan. East Kildonan is consistently showing 0 vacancy. And again, and I think we sort of danced around it, but I think we may have agreed that is indeed based on the distortions caused by these very, very large owner occupied properties. But if you go down to the very bottom where it says overall, it shows 4.8. That's the overall vacancy, and that's based on all areas. And then on my next page, where we look at investment vacancy by district, it shows 4.5. So we're trying to find investment grade, single tenant vacancies. Again, the challenge is that this property is very, very large. It's atypical, so we have to be mindful of that. But if the overall vacancy by the Johnson report is suggesting citywide 4.5 to 4.8, which I think is a touch high, then we're good at 4% based on the sheer size of the property. So I think that's all supported.
Thank you. No other questions.
Thank you. So, Mr. Story, did you inspect this property?
I did not personally, but as Mr. Brown has mentioned, both sides have inspected the property many, many times. So I have a pretty I have a number of notes and photos on file. So I didn't inspect it, but I feel like we was able to conclude a pretty thorough desktop review on this property.
All right, thank you. So you've talked about the maintenance of this road, Lexington Road.
Yes.
Do you have any costs associated with that?
No, I don't. It's I you know what I was just and it's not mentioned in my chief submission because I only noticed it in the last couple of days reviewing Mr. Brown's evidence and then going down and looking through all the different development applications, and that's where I first noticed that there's this private road that is maintained through the by the ownership. So no, I did not have the opportunity. That's a great question. I'd love to know what the overall allowances for maintenance and repair, but we've simply tried to capture that extra degree of uncertainty or risk in the cap rate. That was our position. But going forward, I think it would be good to get a budget of what the expectation would be and how that would be different from a typical property. Yeah.
All right. And to the best of your knowledge, is this an unusual situation where a private business is responsible for a road.
Yeah, so I'm familiar
City
with,
police.
yes, yeah. So there's I know from the past reviews of properties and listening to hearings, I know that Terracon Place has a similar situation, and I believe there's I don't know the exact details, but I know at the Waverly Auto Mall, I was able to find last night an old municipal board decision talking about a private road allowance that caused a reduction. So I didn't submit it as rebuttal. The assessor has not put anything forward, so I wouldn't be rebutting anything, and I don't have very clear details on that. But I did notice it when searching the municipal board orders that there was that consideration at the Waverly Auto Mall, and I know from my personal experience that there was a similar situation at Terracon Place.
All right, thank you. And just in regards to your rent comparables.
Yes.
Sorry. On your page. So number 3, 13 Sony Place,
Yes, 1370
built
Sony
in
Place.
1980.
Yep.
So similar in size. So would you say that's your best comparable?
Yes, it would be. It would be superior, though. I would suggest. I've seen a number of photos of it in the interior. Ours is in very good condition as well. So, but I would suggest to you that the rents in industrial are they are a fair bit higher in the south versus potentially where we are if we had a lease. So that rent might be higher based on location, but I think you're quite right. I mean, it's 92.93% of our subject size, so it's certainly the closest in terms of size. It is good quality. Ours is as well. Sony is just in what I would say is likely a superior location. So I think that I think that our rent makes sense with that with those considerations. So we have to make some adjustments for some of those issues. So, but yes, I agree. I think it's best comp, but I do think it's in a superior location.
Right, because it's in the Fort Garry location.
Right, and the charts that we've seen from the brokers do suggest that the rents, the industrial rents, are a fair bit higher in the south than they are in the north. So, based on the rents that it's able to achieve, it would be superior from my perspective.
Okay, so just wondering, would you happen to know the split within the building itself in terms of manufacturing and office?
That I don't know. No, I'm not sure.
All right. Thank you. That's all my questions. Mr. Brown, I would just like to direct to you for, and I'm sorry if I missed this. I was trying to go back to your brief. When I had asked you previously about the vacancy that you had issued, you did say that it was model driven, correct?
Correct, yes.
But I'm just wondering, did you have any actual evidence on the vacancy?
No, we don't provide evidence on vacancy, unfortunately.
All right.
But I do think that the evidence that Mr. Story provided does show that we know we're not out to lunch on this.
No, nor am I suggesting that.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you both. Do either of you have a wish for a summation on this property?
No, thank you.
Just very, very quickly, Madam Chair, and of course, thank you all for listening to our concerns today. I would point out once again that this is a model derived assessment of a property that doesn't, from my perspective anyway, doesn't necessarily fit neatly into the model. We have this enormous space. It's fitted up for its current user. We believe that the modeled vacancy is too low. We believe that cap rate as modeled does not necessarily capture some of these site-specific issues. So ultimately, and just to be, not to put too fine a point on it, but to be very clear, we don't believe that a 75 basis point adjustment to the cap rate by the model is supported by the market in this instance. So we feel very comfortable with the evidence that we've submitted and respectfully ask that our position be given weighted consideration on that basis. And I thank you.
And thank you. Mr. Brown, any change? Did you want to have a summation?
No, thank you.
All right. I thank you both, Mr. Brown and Mr. Story for your presentations this morning, and thank you for your appearance. And we have heard all the items on the docket this morning, and this hearing is now adjourned.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Have a good
everyone.
day, everyone.
Have a great day. Thank you.